We're going to start the day focusing on the state of the Farm Bill, ever important to the rural economy, and on rural ag policy in Washington. I'm going to catch up with my good friend and chair of the Senate Ag Committee, my mentor, the woman who has made it all happen in terms of farm bills. Those of us who brag about the farm bills that we basically helped pass, she's been at the helm steering it all the way along. And so we're hopeful that she'll be able to join us. I think that we were looking at some Senate votes, but we just got good news that she'll be able to join us on time. And after that, we'll continue the Farm Bill discussion with Rod LaRue, who is the president of the National Farmers Union. What do they expect will happen? How do they see it from the perspective of a major farm organization? We're going to also have a conversation about fentanyl and the rural overdose crisis with some experts in the field and really groundbreaking work to combat the harms of opioids. Those of us who live in rural America know that this crisis has in many ways hit rural America much harder. Then my brother, and yes, I'm so sorry, the co-host of One Country, the Hot Dish podcast, Joel Heitkamp, he basically has 100,000 people who will listen to him every day on his radio show, which is a good thing because his family doesn't really listen to him. But he'll lead a discussion about rural broadband and implementing service to communities and how important that is to stay connected. We'll also have multiple conversations featuring the discussion about a new film called War Game, which is a project that I've been very intimately involved in. And I hope you will enjoy the work that's been done there and also take it for the alert that I think it should be. And if that wasn't enough to scare you, we're going to have a discussion on Project 2025 with Ruth Ben Giyat, and we'll close the day with some deep dives into political data with Jeff List. A note to our audience, between sessions, you will return to the lobby area and can select the next scheduled programming you want to participate in. You also can visit our virtual expo floor to learn about our sponsors and partners who make the Rural Progress Summit possible. So now I'm excited to keep my week of catching up with old friends from the Senate continuing. We're going to welcome Debbie Stabenow, hopefully, there you are, Deb.
Hello, Heidi.
Well, we've got the master right here who is going to tell us all about whether she's going to get a farm bill passed. Yeah. You've done it how many times now, Senator?
Well, I've been involved in 6, but this is the 3rd one I've led. So I've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, well, you are the master of the Senate as it relates to the Farm Bill. And I know you, and you're a tough negotiator, a principled negotiator. Can you, number one, just lead with what you think the differences are, why you introduced the bill that you introduced, and then we can get into maybe some of the nuanced differences, and then we'll ask the all-important question that you are tired of hearing, are we going to get a Farm Bill this year? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your Farm Bill right now.
Absolutely. Well, first, Heidi, I miss you on the committee. You were such an important voice for your state, but for rural communities all across the country. I love what you're doing with One Country. So thank you for everything. And we are one country. And, everybody may not be in a spot where folks are farming, but we all eat. And food security, as you know, is a national security issue as well as an economic issue and a quality of life issue. And we've got to support our farmers, particularly as they're getting hit over the head on the climate crisis right now with more and more. It's never been easy, always the toughest business in the world, now getting tougher. And at the same time, we got to make sure folks continue to have the safest, most affordable, even though prices have been up, it's still the most affordable, safest food supply in the world. And so we have a lot to do together. And as you said, it's interesting because normally the process for doing this is you work with your ranking member of the other party, you work behind the scenes, you negotiate, you put together something as bipartisan. It just has not worked this year this way. And so I tried something different, which is to put forward my vision working with our Democratic colleagues on the committee. We have subcommittees that have been robustly involved in all of this, getting information and listening to people around the country. But what I'm really proud of is that I've included over 100 different bipartisan bills from members of our committee working together, and we call them marker bills, as you know. So we got over 100. So yes, I put it forward, as the Democratic chair and with the Democrats on the committee. But we know it needs to be bipartisan. We want it to be, and we are reaching out in every way where it makes sense to make sure that we are doing things together. One of the big differences, though, and it just in the broad picture, our Rural Prosperity and Food Security Act really embraces, first of all of our agriculture, large and small, heavy focus on beginning farmers. We had a great hearing yesterday that Senator Tina Smith led with Senator I'm drawing a blank, from Mississippi, Smith, a great bipartisan focus on beginning farmers. And frankly, our Senate bill does much more for beginning farmers in terms of what needs to happen to give them a chance to get going, to get extra discounts on crop insurance, to be able to get the support they need on credit and so on, because we've got a lot of farmers, that are getting up there and retiring, and they may pass it on to their children. But if these are young farmers or new farmers getting in that don't have that opportunity, it's tough. It's very, very tough. So we do, in our bill, we look at a farm safety net for all kinds of farmers. And I will tell you that in the House bill, it's very skewed to the largest farms that have what's called base acres. Back in the 80s, they looked around and did a survey of what was planted. And they came up with 22 crops and what they call base acres. Were you growing wheat? Were you growing corn or cotton or rice or peanuts and so on? And the farm commodity programs, the two main programs, are based on that, on how many base acres you have. Well, a new farmer getting in doesn't have that. A new farmer, starting from scratch, right? And so what we do is we provide them an opportunity to count what they're doing to get into the program as new base acres.
So Debbie, can I just ask you a quick question? Because
Absolutely.
we're seeing emerging crops, and I think one point that we need to make is when you look at these crops, the crops of the future may not be necessarily those big ones, and so base acres plays a big role in people's willingness to transition to edibles, to transition to other kinds of crops, and I think it's important for people to understand that.
Absolutely. And one of the big debates that divides the commodity groups right now is whether or not there should be a mandatory update to look at what we plant. National corn growers took what I think was a courageous step, because it's controversial among all the agriculture commodity groups, to say, you know what, we've been operating under a system of base acres that hasn't been updated since the 80s. We should update it. We should look at what's planted.
By the way, let's remind people that for those of us who are old, the 80s were 40 years ago.
I know. Don't remind me. And so, and let me give you an example. And this becomes very, very important, by the way. Why am I mentioning this? Because the House bill gives a 70% increase in commodity payments for those crops, mainly big farmers, mainly in the South. So 7-0, we've never had a 70% increase in the farm bill in anything. 70%, not paid for, by the way, 70%. And that beginning farmer gets none of that. If they only gave a 10% increase in crop insurance, everybody has the opportunity to get crop insurance. And we need to be doing more and more and more. 136 different crops, some small farms, micro crop insurance, whole farm crop insurance, specialty crop insurance. That's the risk management tool farmers want. But we're focusing on the big, 70%. And I would just say one other thing, Heidi, to put this in perspective, it would double the payments for cotton, rice, and peanuts in the South, which basically puts us back to the old system that we rejected in the 2014 Farm Bill, which means that direct payments, where you get a government payment, whether it's a good time or bad time, you would always get a government payment.
I think the other thing, when you said it's not paid for, I think they intend to pay for it, but they might be doing some pay fors that the
Right.
chair of the Senate committee doesn't think is appropriate. And I think for our
Exactly.
audience who is concerned about, what are we doing in this farm bill in the climate space, you introduced the challenges that are unique now in agriculture on the climate space. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, you all did.
Right.
There was a big plus up, as you know, of programs that were overprescribed, meaning that more people wanted in these conservation programs that we had dollars for. And so the interplay, can you talk a little bit, Debbie, about the interplay between the Inflation Reduction Act and the conflict now on the Farm Bill?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Because you're right. I mean, they do have areas that they want to cut and change. They want to take money from the nutrition title, which gives food to people, and at the same time, a 70% increase in farm payments to the biggest 22 crops. On the conservation side, we know that the climate crisis is just hitting farmers over the head right and left. And one of the really great things that we did last year as part of this Inflation Reduction Act, something my team led on, which was to give a $20 billion investment in conservation to support our farmers focused on voluntary practices to address climate. We all know, I mean, that the great news is, from an agriculture standpoint, is that farmers want more carbon in the soil because it's healthier soil. We want less carbon in the atmosphere because it's a healthier atmosphere. So this is like a win-win, right? And so we have put major effort into supporting things that farmers want. Farmers want. I mean, right now there's 3 farmers applying for every 1 opportunity to get funding under this. And so what we have said as Democrats is we want to protect that money. It's outside the Farm Bill, and we want to move it into the conservation title of the Farm Bill, but keep all the focus on climate. And it doesn't affect, 49 of the top 50 most popular conservation programs are covered under what we call the climate provisions. So this really isn't a fight. It really isn't. It's a fight because there are folks who don't like the word climate. And so, but we want to move that in. We want to put it in the Farm Bill, protect that money, and keep the climate provisions. And by the way, and we also in our bill would do some things to provide extra support for beginning farmers. I keep going back to that because we have to support the farmers of the future with everybody.
So, Debbie, just to impress on I've been looking for, as you know, even when I was there, deeply concerned about the aging population of farmers, about whether we're going to attract young people. We know that there is a lot of young people who literally want to get into farming, who would love to continue the family farm, but the risk is so high. So could you just give some demographic information about where we are with farmers and how important it is to get young people excited, and not just young people who are now shareholders in large farm corporations, but young people who plan on, kind of raising the cattle and driving the tractor?
Absolutely. Well, we're seeing about 40% of our farmers right now reaching retirement age, and it's going up every year. The good news is that we're seeing more beginning farmers. Actually, 30% of our farmers are beginning farmers, but they have just extra challenges of whether or not they can make it. And so, unless they're part of a legacy farm, which is great, if it's a multi-generational farm, even then there are challenges for them. But one of the things that is helping us to expand is to really focus on small farms. In our bill, we set up an office of small farms to help people get started. Urban agriculture, which is a way in urban areas to have a couple of acres or just a plot to be able to start agriculture produce and sell directly to restaurants or hospitals or schools, or get a market going, create jobs. It's sustainable agriculture. We're talking about regenerative agricultural practices that are really important for conservation. But what we are doing, and frankly, the Biden administration, Secretary Vilsack, have totally embraced this idea of not only local farms, but processing. We saw what happened under COVID when we lost all those big supply chains. And so there's been a huge focus on regional meat operations, small meat operations, doing more where we're processing in a way that allows people to grow smaller enterprises, process locally, sell locally. Now, we need the big enterprises. I'm not saying that we don't support them at all, but we really need, from a resiliency standpoint, to be broadening, what we're looking at in agriculture, and also from a climate standpoint, and from a health standpoint, and from a job standpoint. We need to be broadening it.
The one thing that I tell people when they say, well, farm, I think the previous Secretary of Agriculture said, get big or get out, right? And I said, what happens to the farm program when there's only 20 big farm corporations in America? What's the safety net for food security then? We know that the amazing thing about American agriculture is we do have that diversity. Yes, you're going to have the big guys, but if you lose the small guys, you lose political incentive to provide that risk mitigation that's important to provide food security. What happens when you have just 5 big corporate farms and they say, well, we're not going to risk it, so we're not going to plant, we're just going to farrow this year?
I know. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And also, when you mentioned politically, I do think about this. I mean, it gets harder and harder to get the interest of everybody in Congress to want to do a farm bill. What the vision that I have been pushing, that we have done in the 2014 bill and 2018 bill, is to have more and more people have a stake and understand that agriculture is in their community, that access to healthy foods, that the farmers markets, the small enterprises, as well as the big ones. If you do what you're talking about and have only a few, I'm not sure they can pass a farm bill. I mean, this is, and if they don't tie it to access, food assistance, they really can't pass a farm bill.
That's I think a good segue to the differences that you have on food security and how important, just to give people a historic context, this was an alliance and a great idea between George McGovern and Bob Dole. They said, look, the farm bill, there's fewer and fewer farm legislators, members of Congress. We need to continue to, raise awareness that the farm bill is about food security. Let's merge the nutrition program into the farm bill. And I hear really misguided if I can use the word stupid ideas of separating these. And I want just to talk about the importance of, number one, keeping these together in the farm bill, but also how this tension between food security and the commodity programs have driven some of the challenges that you have leading the next farm bill.
Well, it's the number one challenge we have right now. And, as you know, every time we try to write a farm bill, the politics of nutrition, the politics around the food assistance program always comes in, always. Every time it fails when folks try to cut the nutrition title. 2012, we passed a bill, went to the House. I mean, they cut nutrition and it failed. 2018, in the House, they cut nutrition and it failed. So then they come back and they put the whole Farm and Food Coalition back together and we get a farm bill. And so what I'm telling folks over and over again, look, this not my first rodeo here. I know how to get a farm bill. And I also know I'm not going to cut nutrition assistance. And you're going to lose almost every single Democrat if you do that. And then the politics on the other side, there are 170 House Republicans in their very, very conservative study group that came out with their own budget that slashed everything in ag, commodities, food assistance, everything. So they're going to lose those folks in the House. They won't have any Democrats. And so they can't get a farm bill. And so what I'm saying is, this is real simple. in the history of farm bills, we've never taken money out of the nutrition title to fund another part of the farm bill. We've also never put money into the nutrition title. We let it stand on its own. If we increase anything, it's because of efficiencies. We've got in our bill, we deal with some integrity issues and bad actors, and we save some money so we can put it back into some things to strengthen access to food. But no new money goes into it. We just take what is there. But we don't take money out to fund big farm subsidies. And so if we can get agreement to do what we've done historically, then we can go on and we can get a farm bill, and we'll negotiate a farm bill. And, it won't be everything I want. It won't be everything everybody else wants. It's a big country with big interests. And, some things, I'm enthusiastic about, and other things I don't like so much, but you weave it together. And so that's what we're trying to do.
So Debbie, of course, you know me well enough to know I'm not going to talk about the Farm Bill without talking about research and extension.
Yes.
And especially in the climate space, as we're looking at kind of training or helping farmers adapt to certain climate practices, that workforce is all important. That's going to be done through extension. Talk a little bit about your vision in the Farm Bill for research and for workforce and for extension.
This is so important. And one of the big differences between the House bill that came out of committee with almost no Democratic support and the bill that we have in the Senate is we continue funding and increase funding for FAR, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, which Senator Roberts and I joined together on in a bipartisan effort. You were there supporting it, to have this public-private research effort. Federal government puts in half of it, the private sector puts in half of it. And it's been working now for 10 years. And so we add to that. It's been traditionally around 200 million. We put 250 million in. We also added robust funding for specialty crop research, or organic research, other areas. And we put a down payment on research facilities. As you know, our land grants, and we are desperate to upgrade the research facilities. And personally, I believe it's going to take a moonshot around agricultural research. And I've been talking to folks at the National Science Foundation. Senator Maria Cantwell chairs the Commerce Committee, and she agrees with me. She oversees them, that we need a broader moonshot where we're looking not just in USDA, but more broadly about how we invest in food security as national security. And
it's bioresearch, and that's going to be translatable to a lot of different areas. And Debbie, I feel like I could talk to you for another 20 minutes or more about the great work that you've always done and your commitment long term to rural America. But I have two last questions. The last one, or the first of my last questions, is how do you anticipate, maybe not before the election, but after the election, that you'll be able to basically get a farm bill? And if not, do you think it'll be difficult to get an extension?
Well, let me say, I'm going to answer that. Is one other thing I just forgot to mention to you that I know is near to dear in your heart and ours as well. And that our bill, for the first time, puts $200 million into rural development for rural childcare, hospitals, mental health for the first time. So quality of life. Again, we want people in small towns and rural communities. We need to lift them up in their quality of life.
So Debbie, as long as we're listing all of my priorities, don't forget the bees.
Oh.
Dig in the bees.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and so do we get a bill? I'm doing everything I can to get a bill. And I think if we decide we want something that brings the whole coalition together, we absolutely can get this done. Maybe not before the election, but we absolutely can get it done by the end of the year. Could be before the election. There's a number of areas that I won't go through, but that are similar between the House and the Senate. Dairy and specialty crops and a number of things where there's common ground. And so it's just these big areas, this big political thing, and so if we can get past those, we can actually get a farm bill done. I think it's very important to do everything we can before the end of the year. If not, the process is to extend the 2018 Farm Bill, which, by the way, has served pretty well. It has automatic triggers that are going to increase reference prices under the current law. And hopefully we could get that extended without a lot of trouble. We worked really well together on the extension we did already. And for the first time, actually extended all of those things that only had 5-year funding, didn't have totally baseline funding. And it was a good process. And so I'm hopeful that can happen. But what we really need is a farm bill. We need to do it the right way.
Yeah. I mean, without a doubt. And my last question, my dear friend, is you're going to be leaving the United States
Right.
Senate. I used to say there were only really 2 people in the entire country who understood the Farm Bill, and that was you and Colin Peterson. Ken Conrad and Byron Dorgan used to be on that list.
Right, right.
As we look at, Colin unfortunately wasn't able to get reelected, and now you've volunteered to retire. What's your advice to future members who are interested, and what are you going to be doing to stay in the fight? Because I know you will be going forward.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm going to stay in Michigan, but I'm going to stay in the fight. And I have been so involved in the connection between agriculture and climate and what we need to do on sustainability and moving forward. It's an important place, and our farmers and ranchers and foresters can play such an important positive role on addressing climate. And I want to, in some way, just be supportive and remain in that. And really, I think the most important thing is that we have people that understand what we're talking about here, that agriculture should not be viewed as some niche. It's 1 out of 4 jobs in Michigan. I mean, we make things and grow things in Michigan. That's what we do. I don't think you have an economy unless you do that. 1 out of 4 jobs. And we need to think of agriculture and food production in the broadest possible sense. Think about food assistance in the broadest possible sense. That's the coalition that we need. That's a coalition farmers need to make sure that we can get future farm bills. And so I worry a little bit about, how all this debate's going. In fact, I worry a lot about some of what I see in the positions being taken, because it doesn't look long-term about what farmers need to get the support that they need. And so that's what we have to do.
Yeah, and I think to not put a fine point on it, there is reliably, especially the Freedom Caucus over in the House, 20 to 30 votes that will never vote for a farm bill.
Oh, yeah.
And so this has to be, I think the point that we want to make is that in that narrow of margin over there, it has to be bipartisan. And maybe the thinking is that you run a farm bill up the flagpole, it fails, then you have more latitude to come back and negotiate. I don't know, Debbie, what the strategy is over there, but it seems to me that everybody's kind of holding on to the next election. And this is a real problem in America. We are never not in the next election, right? And right. So this idea that we have some grace for the a hot minute when you all come back after the election that you can get stuff done, that time is narrower and narrower, and the need to have stability. The Farm Bill has been, especially since 12, but since Freedom to Farm was basically moved away from, and our good friend Pat Roberts was a big part of, kind of talking common sense in the end. And, I miss him every day.
I know.
That the good old Marine who kind of kept the trains running on time when I was there and he was chair. But I think this coalition that we once thought was very robust and unbreakable, there's some fragility to it. And that's one thing that concerns me, when there aren't bridge builders or people who, like you, who have dedicated a huge portion of your legislative priority to agriculture. When those people leave, what happens?
Well,
doesn't
we've got a
doesn't-
lot of educating to do, and you and I from outside the Senate will be doing that. But it is, I had always thought that the Ag Committee was the place that would keep partisanship out. And what's most disappointing to me in the last 2 years is that that's not been the case, and it's bleeding over. And it's what used to just happen in the House is now bleeding over to the Senate and making it very difficult. Just a very difficult situation. And I don't think anybody who thinks it gets better for agriculture to do a farm bill next year, I don't think that's true. I really don't. I think
that was my point, is everybody's saying, oh, well, just wait and it'll be easier. And you're like, in what world is that going to be easier? We're then into the next election, right?
Right.
Into some other kind of, I want to kind of move forward. But Debbie, I hear you have votes, and so we don't keep you too long. But my friend, we need to get together because 2 of the 3 redheaded caucuses, members of the redheaded caucus, are no longer going to be in the Senate. So say hello to our friend James Langford, who fought tonight too.
I will. He's going to be all alone.
Well, he probably feels that way in a lot of ways, right?
I think he does.
I just want to I just want to point out that per capita, the redheads in the United States Senate when we were there, they're pretty good guys. We're pretty.
We were the ones that got stuff done. I think it was the hair. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Debbie. You have a great rest of your day. Let's get together soon.
Absolutely. Bye. Take care.